have an unidentified flying object.
I'm Jack Oswald, and you're listening.
This is Hudson Hamay, and you're listening to...
I'm Richard C. Hoagland, and you're listening to...
I'm Art Bell, and you're listening to Dr. J Radio Live.
We have an unidentified flying object.
We got a great show for everyone here today. We have Dr. Roger Leir, the alien implant doctor. Joining me today, we have our co-host, Preston Dennett. He's MUFON researcher of 22 years, also author of 15 books, 2 more being published right now. Let's bring on Dr. Roger Leir.
Well, hello there, John. Preston, how are you today?
We are doing excellent, Doctor. We are so excited to have you here because, you know, to me, you are a hero in the sense, first of all, you're a very kind man. You've worked really hard to uncover some incredible data. And for all those out there who have opinions, Dr. Leir started as, he works with data. He's an objective person that works with data. And that's why what he handles is so important, because the implants that he's removed and had analyzed, 16 of them total right now, have all shown the data, and he's only going by the data. So all those skeptics there say, oh, because this, he's just making an opinion on that. That's not the case at all. And that's why I think he is the key to disclosure. People keep looking in the skies, asking if we're alone. Well, guess what, everybody? The answer is here, right here on Earth with Dr. Leir. Dr. Leir, why don't we jump in and might as well give a little background. Let's talk about the first implant that you removed, and you were a skeptic at the time, and can you tell the listeners how it started?
Well, yes, I wasn't a skeptic because my interest in the field dated back to 1947, without giving my age away, of course. I can distinctly remember my father bringing a San Francisco Examiner newspaper into our kitchen and laying it out on the table and reading the headline to my mother, which said, U.S. Army Air Force captures flying saucer. And then he went into sort of a long dissertation about how, see, honey, I told you we aren't the only intelligent creatures in this vast universe, and went on and on. And I can see that as clearly today as I did when I was a young boy. So skeptic, no. But when it came, from something that's flying in our skies that may be from some other star system or some other dimension or for wherever it came from, and being piloted by an alien craft was one thing. But to consider implantation, there is where the skepticism started. Now, also I have to add, John, that at the time I got into this, you have to kind of look at the historical situation of what was going on. First of all, we had NICAP and CUFOS and MUFON and a number of different organizations which finally decided that that UFOs were a three-dimensional reality, and we're trying to investigate it. And then, of course, we had the government or military aspect with Project Blue Book, who turned into nothing.
Sorry, go ahead and pick up where you were going on.
Yeah, I was saying that at that time, the organizations that were around, mainly MUFON, was very verbal. They weren't really looking at abduction. Now, many people, I'm sure Stan Friedman does, but many people don't realize the evolution of the subject itself. So when you talked about abduction, they didn't want to hear about it. The star map that Betty saw was finally brought into light and became reality, and the new Gliese computerized a star had seen aboard a craft. And then came Whitley Strieber and Travis Walton and a number of other cases in which it kind of propelled the organizational aspect course, when John Mack, the late Dr. John Mack from Harvard University, came out with the book Abduction, working with Bud Hopkins, that really led to the fact that abductions were a fact. I sort of entered the field with the implant situation. The way that came about was that I was belonged to MUFON and was in the position that we were doing called the Vortex. And as such, I would attend various meetings, and I would write my opinion of the speakers. And since I felt I didn't like what they had to say, or if I disagreed with them or thought they were liars, I would say so. So I wasn't exactly popular as a writer, but people read some scientific facts. And I had been raised in a scientific background, so at one time we were doing research for Dow Corning, looking for substitute for bone implantation. But that's attending one of the conferences, I was approached with a set of x-rays which happened to be of a foot. And since I'm a foot specialist, I guess I was the right one to approach. And he showed me 2 implants, medical records, and said, if you would like to go through these and find where she had a surgery, and pointed out to me, I would like to see it. Would you like to take the records? Well, since this was being held in a hotel, I said, well, I'll tell you what, let me take them to my room, if you would, and tonight I'll review them, and I'll let you know tomorrow. So that's exactly what happened. I looked through the records. I didn't see any evidence, and these were complete records almost since the patient was born. And I didn't see any evidence where she ever had a foot surgery or a foot injury or fracture or anything of that nature. So I brought them back, and I said merely, well, if you think these are so unusual, why don't you just take them out and see what they are? Oh. And he said, well, I think she'd probably be willing to do that, but she doesn't have any money and she doesn't have any medical insurance. So I thought for a minute, and then I said, well, where does she live? And he said, in Texas. And I said, well, if you get her to California, I'll do the surgery free. Thinking in my mind all the time that, well, I'll donate a few hours of my time and prove this guy is a nutcase and prove all this is absolute nonsense, and I'll have some fun. So, I take a couple hours, you go to the show or you go out to dinner or you see a Broadway show or something. I'll just take a couple hours and do this surgery and have a little fun. Well, up to that time, I'd taken out a variety of objects from the human body. Everything from hair to paper to coral to metal to even a hair. So during the next 2 weeks, he called me, and he had another case with an object in the back of the hand. Sent me an X-ray. I took it to the radiologist. Radiologist verified the fact that there was a metallic object in the hand, and he asked me if I could do this surgery, and I said, no, I don't do hands, but I can get a general surgeon to do it. So those were the first 2 cases that we did, and as I said, skeptical was a conservative consideration. I was doing it for fun to really prove that this was nonsense. But as it turned out, many years later and 16 cases later, we've gone 180 degrees to the point where we have now, without a doubt, the so-called smoking gun physical evidence that the human race has had contact with non-terrestrial civilizations.
Go on, Preston.
Can you describe some of these implants? I mean, you must have, at some point, realized that this is something very, very unusual and is the smoking gun. And it seems like you reached that kind of point gradually. And I'm wondering how that whole process went along. I mean, when did you first realize that these were really unusual things? And What exactly are they?
Yeah, that's a good question. What was there that particular moment that occurred where we realized we had something different? Well, actually, there was no instant moment of revelation. It progressed over a period of time, but it did start, Preston, with the first surgery. The first object we took out was a T-shaped object that measured about a centimeter in each direction, and it was covered with this very dark gray membrane, and you couldn't cut through it with a surgical blade. Now, surgical blades are pretty sharp. You can even, either on purpose or accidentally, whittle a bone with one. So not to be able to cut through this material was rather strange. So for the sake of good medical practice, we just set it aside and then went to the other side of the toe and removed this other little cantaloupe seed-shaped device. Now, during the surgery, there were some things that happened that normally don't happen. Because the woman was apprehensive, we used hypnotic anesthesia along with a local anesthesia to anesthetize the area. Well, at one point, I touched something during the surgery, and the patient came out of the hypnotic state and just kicked her foot off the table, screamed out in pain. This was very unusual because we'd given her enough anesthesia to anesthetize the leg, more or less the foot or the toe. So we reinstituted the anesthesia again, both hypnotically and introducing more local, and were able to get the object out. So at that point, we knew there was something that was, let's put it in the category of different. Not extraterrestrial or something mysterious, but different.
Doc, with your implants, everything that you removed with hair, nails, every other pieces of metal, they had inflammatory response, but this didn't, right?
That's correct. But, you're using the naked eye, and when you do these surgeries, you can't really see whether there's an inflammatory response or not, unless it's enclosed in what's called a fibrous inclusion cyst. And if the body, for example, can't expel the object with an inflammatory process, then it merely uses fibrous tissue and walls it off, so it kind of separates it from the rest of the tissues of the body, so the reaction slows down to an acceptable point. We saw a lot of that during World War II, where pieces of windshields were shot into pilots and co-pilots and navigators and so on. And they couldn't be removed because they were in precarious places. But wound up where the patients really didn't have a lot of pain or discomfort with them, because later they found out that they were enclosed in these fibrous inclusion cysts. Well, there was no such thing here at all. So, but as far as an inflammatory process, we didn't know that at the time of surgery. That came later when we'd sent the specimens out and got the pathology report back. And that's when, we did two sides of one toe on one patient and the back of a hand on another patient. And these, out of all the cases that were done between...
Okay, Doc, we're going to close on your call, and we're going to try calling you on your landline and see if that works any better. Preston, in the meantime, can you tell us a little bit about this new book that's coming out, UFOs over Nevada? Preston, you are also coming in, sadly, not very well. Preston, we have you back, right?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, Preston, talk to them about your upcoming book real quick.
All right. Yeah, I've just recently released a book, UFOs over New Mexico, published by Shipper Books. It's in the style of my two other books about activity over states, such as UFOs over New York and UFOs over California. UFOs over New Mexico covers the full range of encounters. Turns out New Mexico has a very long history of UFO encounters, stretching back about 100 years, pretty much like all the states. And I'm very excited about the book. It covers not only sightings, but landings and UFO crashes. It turns out New Mexico has more cases of UFO crashes than any other state. So that's particularly interesting. I think it's because of New Mexico's research into atomics. In fact, if you look at the pattern of sightings over New Mexico, it coincides very closely with the whole atomic era, which is certainly something other researchers have made note of.
You know, Preston, I am eagerly awaiting that UFOs over Nevada book to come out, because I think that's got so much there. You know, finally, after 5-6 decades, we've been talking about, you know, Area 51, and finally the government acknowledges that. Can you tell our listeners about that real quick? Let me get Dr. Leir back on. Doctor.
Yeah, sure. I was actually shocked. You know, UFOs over Nevada is the next one in the series. And I was I thought I knew a lot about Area 51, and certainly everyone's heard of it. It's probably one of the most popular tourist destinations in Nevada. And I know many people who've actually gone there and actually seen UFOs. But when I started doing serious research into the subject of Area 51, I found that the story was actually a lot more complicated and in-depth than I had ever realized. So I think a lot of people are going to be surprised, you know, what I found out about what's going on in Area 51. And for me, what I found most amazing was this article in Fate magazine, actually, in which a bunch of people were asked to visit Area 51 psychically, doing a process of remote viewing or out-of-body experiences, or just clairvoyantly looking in to see what's going on. And what these people found out, you know, a bunch of people wrote in, you know, this was an experiment to see what they would find out. And a bunch of people wrote in and described their experiences, and it was shocking how well they matched up. And not only that, it was amazing to hear what these people were saying about what they saw, which corroborates a lot of what we've heard coming out of this from actual...
Hello?
Preston, guess what? We got Dr. Leir back. I'm sorry to interrupt what you were saying, but it seems like we got these little glitches fixed, and we could continue on. Go ahead, Preston. Pick up where you left off with Dr. Leir. You guys were... Dr. Leir, yeah, go on.
Yeah,
I think you were asking about that moment when we realized that we had something that was non-terrestrial nature. I was explaining that during the first surgeries we had some interesting things happen. But it wasn't until I got the pathology report back where we saw we had no inflammatory reaction, which is almost impossible. And then we had a large number of specialized nerve cells that were surrounding the object in anatomical places where they don't belong. Now, when you see this and you have a scientific background, most of what you're concerned about is the fact that it's you as the individual who may be lacking a certain amount of knowledge. So that's exactly what I thought was happening. You know, I'd been out of school for 30-some-odd years, so maybe there was something new in inflammation that I wasn't aware of. So I did some in-depth research getting into medical school libraries such as Harvard and Stanford and so on, and that's when I began to realize that in-depth research wasn't free. You had to pay a fee to use these school libraries and so on. But to make a long story short, there were some new things about inflammation. We knew things about certain hormones like leukocynin and so on that were attracted to the area, and what we call macrophage attraction activity and changes of some of the white cells. But really the basic inflammatory process was as I had originally learned it. So there wasn't a lack of knowledge, but something else was going on. Then when we went ahead and did the rest of the surgeries, the biological aspect or the pathological aspect kept pretty consistent. So we tried to do, some metallurgical research, but we didn't have any money. We did this,
like I said, it's a project to have fun, and then found some unusual findings, and then really didn't know where to go with them because we didn't have any money to go, directly to a laboratory, a metallurgical laboratory, and even if we did, we didn't know what test to ask for. We had, absolutely no knowledge of this whatsoever. So when we had a number of these specimens, I got a call from, at that time, which was the National Institute of Discovery Science, headed by Robert Bigelow from Las Vegas. And we spent a lengthy conversation on the phone with him, a couple of members of his board, and they said that they would get back to me. Well, they did, and they invited me on their dime to go to Las Vegas and present this material to their science board, and I agreed to do that. But I was scared to death. I wasn't a researcher. I wasn't in there. These were all PhD scientists of the highest caliber, like Jacques Vallée and John Alexander and dozens of other people. So somehow I got enough courage to agree, and I went and I made the presentation. Well, what happened was that half of the board started asking me questions that were so scientific in nature, I couldn't answer them. But to my surprise, the other half of the board took up on my behalf and answered the questions for the other members of the board. So it was quite a meeting, quite an experience, one which I'll never forget. Bob Bigelow is a wonderful man. He's just a very, very dear soul, and an extremely good person, wonderful scientist, excellent thinker, and very successful. And I wish him a lot of continuing luck with his space venture. But at the end of the meeting, we agreed that he took 6 specimens and sent them out for in-depth metallurgical research to laboratories like Los Alamos National Labs and New Mexico Tech. And the minute the data got back, he sent me a complete book-like copy of the data. But at the end, there was no report.
Dr. Leir, do you know why Mr. Bigelow what fascination he had about this? Because he funded a great endeavor to get your information out there. And, there was actually a show on conspiracy theory with Jesse Ventura that talked about Bigelow. And at the very end, Sean Stone asks him, and he said he had a fascination with the subject going back. How did that kind of happen?
Well, I think that he has a deep, deep, deep personal interest in space and life outside of this planet. Excuse me, maybe it was due to something personal or whatever, but it's engendered a drive in him which continues to this day, henceforth Bigelow Aerospace. But as I said, it was fortunate that he did take this interest because I wouldn't have gotten, where we are today without his help. When I got enough data, as I said, it was his dime. He was paying for these reports. Didn't get a report, and he was extremely irritated. So he went back to Los Alamos and New Mexico Tech, and they did produce a report. And they said that the only thing they could compare these objects to were meteorite samples. Well, we know that somebody didn't step on a meteorite or whack the back of their hand with a meteorite. And in any of the cases that we did, there was no scar, there was no portal of entry, there was no way it could have gotten in there, which was added to the mystery. But we did start coming up with some metallurgical data, and then we went up from there, and I formed a nonprofit organization, ANS Research, and we got scientists to come aboard. Excuse me. And started our own scientific endeavor so we could produce some in-house science and So I had to learn. Believe me, I knew nothing about the field of metallurgy, but in order to understand what these guys were talking about, I had to learn and sat down with books and, figure out what non-terrestrial isotopes meant and, what meteoric iron was and a lot of other things that had to do with it. More than what I had.
What's amazing, Roger, is that you're doing such pioneering work here, and there really isn't a guidebook on how to study these implants. So my question is, what do you think these implants are? I mean, do you have any idea of their purpose, or have the abductees told you anything about what they think they might be?
Well, speaking scientifically, again, and you mentioned at the top of the show that, this wasn't my knowledge. I more compare myself to a plumber than anything else. I mean, you have a stopped-up drain, and the plumber comes out and he takes the junk out of your drain. Well, he isn't responsible for the analysis of what's down there. So the same thing with me. I mean, I'm the hands that removes the object, and we set up a strict set of criteria and protocols to tie it to the abduction phenomena. But in answer to your question, it's okay scientifically theorize, and that's what we've done. Now, we know that alien abduction phenomena all over the world. I've been in 42 countries in 7 years. We know that it's basically all has mainly one thing in common, and that is the taking of ova and sperm. Well, I've said this many times. I don't think that whoever's ever taking this material is part of the cooking channel. They're not making omelets with it, obviously there's something genetic going on. So it looks to me, and again, I did a study on 17 functional growth characteristics in children over a period of 40 years and found that they've been accelerated from 16 to 86%. Now, that's a lot of acceleration of these growth characteristics over a period of 40 years. So you can't say that's evolution or even fast evolution. And then when you look at the possibilities, let's look at environmental change, for example, with the increased amount of high energy particles coming from the sun producing mutations, as they do with viruses and bacteria. Well, if that was the case, I mean, we find a lot of babies born with a blue eye and a black eye or a red eye, or six fingers on one hand and 4 on the other. But we don't see that. Instead, we see very specific accelerations and things like when a child can first raise its head, stand in a crib, take a first few steps, stair climb, first stage of simple speech, or first stage of complex speech, and then you look at what a child says if you really listen. And I've had this conversation with mothers and grandmothers and grandfathers all over the world. It's the same. If you really listen to what they have said to say, they have a built-in sense of knowledge that they're not getting out of books and they're not getting off the TV. They seem to be tuned in. These are the kids that now are 30 or 35 years of age, and here they fulminated a revolutionary war starting in Egypt, which spread all through the Middle East through the means of electronics. I went to a museum in Philadelphia where they had a Leonardo da Vinci exhibit. And the museum had taken the time and money to actually build the models that Leonardo da Vinci designed. And they built them out of wood. And in an adjoining room were these pedestal-type computers in which kids, maybe 6, 7, 8, 9 years of age, were using these computers with their parents standing there. And as you see on CSI or Hawaii 5-0, flipping these menus and pictures onto virtual screens and actually building these objects that the museum had built, Leonardo da Vinci's designs, with the parents standing there, young parents, scratching their heads. So are we undergoing a change? Is the human race changing? And if this theory is correct, and I want to find out what the results, what the scientific results are of your manipulation. You don't have to come back and re-abduct everybody again. You merely have to tag them like we do with bears and whales, and you only do about 15% before you can make a logical statement that, you know, during the hibernation of the bear, they consume so much food, their respiratory rate, and so on and so on. And we always remember that when John went into space, he complained on national TV that he had to swallow what? Implants. Because Mission Control had to know stuff about the physiology in space. So that's based on our logic, John and Preston. But, you know, how could we possibly even have the audacity to assume that a civilization that's 1,000 or 1,000,000 years older than we are, even using any portion of what is related to our Homo sapien logic?
You know, Doc, I completely agree with what you say. Just like with Stan Friedman said with the SETI silly effort to investigate, we're sending out those radio waves. Why are we have the arrogance to assume that we're going to get replies with radio waves when a civilization, like you said, that could be hundreds of thousands, if not millions, if not 1 billion years ahead of us, would be using the same technology we are?
Yeah, well, they may be more advanced than us, but you know, for some reason they are interested in us. I mean, I think that's very clear that so many people are being abducted and having these experiences shows that these ETs, whoever they are and whatever their agenda is, they're really profoundly interested in us.
Well, I think, yes, whoever is doing this is interested in us, and not for altruistic reasons that they're trying to make better humans. But, you know, in order to understand the present, in order to understand the future, you must have some understanding of the past. And that's what most people don't bother to take the time to learn. It's there. It's in the books. It's on the Internet. You know, if you read Zachariah Sitchin's set of books, the Earth Chronicles, you know, if you read the ancient literature, and you get an understanding of what mankind was and where it came from, and don't cloud it with other theories such as the theistic approach to, you know, we were made by a God in the image of a God, which is the Bible or any of the other literature doesn't say that. So if you have an understanding of where we came from, then maybe you have an understanding of where we're going. I think that we've reached a state in our development where we become probably dangerous, not only to ourselves, but probably to the universe. So, you know, going back to Gene Roddenberry's non-interference agreement, you know, how do you go about solving this problem if you were responsible for us in the first place? You'd have to go back to where you started with and re-manipulate the human genome. And you asked for a theory. Well, that's what I think is going on. And there was a term that was coined some years ago by John White in Connecticut. And he called the new humans Homo Noeticus. And that means basically new human. So that's, you know, leave it to us to solve our own problems. But you give us a different genome to solve it so that we don't destroy the Earth and release atomic energy. To this day, you know, the release of atomic energy either underground or in the atmosphere releases a magnetic wave which nobody seems to bother to talk about, except some of the physicists, and it travels out to space. Well, we don't know where it goes or what it does. But maybe that's not such a good thing.
You know, Doc, I'm saying that you have the smoking gun in your hand, which I truly believe you do. When we had Stan Romanek on a couple weeks ago, he talked about his implant. He actually said he possibly had up to 3 in him, but one of them was removed. I guess it was protruding outside of his skin near his stomach, and it just came out, and it immediately started reacting with the air. But he has photographs. I believe it's probably from electron microscope, that I'm assuming, and it shows virus-sized gears and possibly virus-sized or single-celled size microchips. Would you say that you found the exact same things on your implants?
No. We don't find anything that, as far as academic science is concerned, is within the realm of human science. These things are nanotechnological, highly sophisticated devices that emit not only electromagnetic fields, but also in certain instances radio waves, which is quite a conundrum because, as we pointed out, what advanced civilization is going to be dealing with a radio wave? So there's only 2 possibilities. Number one is that there's a deal that has been made so that somebody is piggybacking on these radio waves and getting the data also in our human existence, or that we're dealing with is a completely different electromagnetic spectrum where we're using scalar wave technology, and the scalar waves are producing a harmonic, which we read as a radio wave. But peculiarly enough, if that were the case, I have evidence to show that the frequencies that we find are deep space, fixed or mobile frequencies. So, you know what you were, Doc,
what you were saying about that piggybacking, it fits perfectly with Preston in a book that he wrote, UFOs Over California. He has an entire chapter devoted to the Eisenhower meeting. And in that meeting, they talk about this treaty that they had where they could abduct a certain number of humans, and that they have to report to those people to the White House. Do you think maybe that's what the piggybacking of the radio signals is, so that the intelligence community and maybe whoever was behind that treaty on the human side is also getting the information that these extraterrestrials are getting from it?
No, I think it's a consideration that we have to look at that may be based in some actual reality. But, we really don't know how many groups are visiting here. The entities that crashed in Brazil, they were not described anywhere else by any abductees. They weren't wearing any clothes. It doesn't look like they had any intention of landing here at all. And with the object that went down, the farmer who originally saw it said that there was a piece that was missing out of what he called the tail end of it, and it was trailing vapor or smoke. Now you combine that with the fact that NORAD from the United States had notified the Brazilian Space Agency that this object was coming down from space and gave them the exact coordinates and time where it was coming down. I mean, it's a little bit suspicious when you see a craft trying to fly around and there's a piece missing out of it and it's smoking. I mean, what does that tell you?
It sounds like they shot him down.
Yeah, well, that's what it sounds like to me. So again, we don't know how many entities from somewhere else were visiting here back in the days of Robert Dean when he was at Shape Command headquarters in Europe. I think he talked about the assessment saying there was either 12 or 14 different races. Well, my God, that was years and years and years ago. And then look at the Betty Hill star map with the lines going between trade routes. We were so far off of the trade route. Why would anybody want to come here in the first place? So, but we've changed now. Back in Betty and Barney Hill day, we weren't doing what we're doing. We're not burning the rainforest. We're not releasing atomic energy. We don't have plants that are atomic plants that are imploding and releasing radiation into the environment. So things have changed.
You know how you were saying that Bob Dean had said that there was a few 12 to 14 different entities. Well, Clifford Stone, when he left, I think it was, 88, 89, around there, he said there was, I think, 57 different species. Well, a couple months ago, we had Carrie Cassidy on, who has a lot of whistleblowers that she's interviewed. She said the estimates now can be as high as 250 different species. What do you think about that?
Well, based on, again, science and our own new astronomical knowledge, I mean, it was pretty exciting when they announced that they had found 6, extraterrestrial or exoplanets orbiting the sun. And then it got even more exciting when they said they found 27. And then it got even more exciting when they found over 1,000. And now I understand they're talking about numbers around 27,000, with a certain amount of them being in the so-called Goldilocks zone. They're not that far away. So it seems to be more and more and more, if we're looking for extraplanetary life on exoplanets, not saying that these entities are coming from another planet, within our portion of the universe, or from this universe at all. The multiverse theory still holds water. Nobody's blown that up yet. And then there's the extra-dimensional theory, where you can have more than one existence going on at the same time, according to Einstein, or at different times. So it gets very, very complex, and then we start talking about how many entities are visiting here, or where they may be coming from. You're talking about some phenomenal numbers. But I think we got interested. I think we started interesting non-terrestrial entities at the beginning of the atomic age. Because even today,
that when we launched the atomic bomb, it basically set off a nuclear reaction that's like a domino chain that never ends. So we basically gave an open invitation to the universe, saying we are now an atomic civilization, and that coincides with so many UFOs starting to come in and watching us. Which, well, wouldn't you agree that that's probably what brought them back in 47 or 44, as opposed to them coming for thousands of years, and why all of a sudden we were rushed with so many different species and in such a short time?
Oh, I would say it's a good possibility, because even today, the highest concentrations of UFO sightings are in areas where there are uranium mining activities going on.
Can you all those people, the debunkers who are going to say that the actual implants are meteorites, they're going to try to dismiss this as simply meteorites. I know we talked about this a little last hour, but can you set the record straight and tell them why it's not?
Well, if they say these things are meteorites, I mean, they're talking like kindergarten children, because how are you going to get hit with a meteorite and not have a scar? And how are you going to get the meteorite in your body without having a scar? How is a meteorite in any way going to have an effect on the physiology of the body, or communicate, or put out radio signals? I mean, that would be so absurd in making that statement. I used to say that the skeptics were psychics, because they didn't like that. But they seem to know everything about what you're doing, but they never look at any of the data. And besides that, don't as I said, I'm the plumber, so don't bother talking to me or criticize me. Talk to the scientists that are involved. Talk to Bob Bigelow. Talk to people from A&S Research.
You know, you're so right when you say these skeptics act like psychics, because they do have answers for everything without even looking at the data. They just seem to know what the answer is without anything. You had a little incident where you had the book that the skeptics use, which basically dismisses everything. Can we talk a little bit about that? And if it's okay with you, can we talk a bit about what happened with the History Channel?
Well, yes, I did a program which will go unnamed, but we gave them a specimen, which was a portion of one of the implants specimen materials, and they wanted me to take it to a place where I could have an exact piece cut to their specifications. So I did that, and it was a rectangle of certain measurement. And I found out the only place I could have this done was a lapidary. So I went to a lapidary, and he cut this thing exactly the way I wanted it. So the essence of the show was they showed certain things which they were able to prove negative, or that they weren't what they thought they were. Certain things they couldn't make up their mind, and certain things which were positive, and so on. So this was one of the three. We'll come to find out that at the end of the show, the position they took on this object was negative. In other words, it wasn't what it was shown to be. So I was kind of taken aback about that, and I had my agent get in touch with them, and they found out that they had sent it to a fairly well-respected scientist at an unnamed university with a lot of good reputation, science department. And I got the name of the scientist, and I called him, and he said, well, I hope you're not upset about the results of the examination of the material that they showed on TV. I said, no. I said, you seem to be, a certainly reputable science, and I'm sure you did your homework and you reached that particular conclusion. But I was just wondering, some of the findings and so on. And he says, well, I hope you didn't mind. I just cut the little corner off the triangle. And I said, triangle? What triangle are you talking about? And he says, oh, a triangular piece of metal you sent me. And I said, but I didn't send you a triangular piece of metal. I sent you a rectangle of certain dimensions, which I gave him. Oh, no, that's not what I received. So, again, I got a hold of my agent, and I went, I should add this, that finally, a few weeks after the show aired, they sent me material back. But they made a heck of a mistake, because the piece that they supposedly sent me back was a triangle. But that wasn't what I gave them. They switched it. And so I had my agent call at that time the company and talk to the producer, and their answer was simply, we don't care, put in a different terminology.
Wow. So would you take that evidence of an actual cover-up of, what your findings?
No, it wasn't a cover-up. It was... I did. John has seen the film I did, which we're trying to get it, legally so we can sell it and air it. But when you go into Hollywood and you look at all these things, and it has to do with the UFO phenomenon, all these skeptics and debunkers and lies and all sorts of stuff. But when you talk about even subjects like ghosts, you don't see them, and there's been no films, nothing released in video, DVD from Hollywood or anywhere else that I know of that has debunkers debunking God. You just don't see that. So we went kind of in and did an in-depth behind-the-scenes research project, and what we came out with was very simple. You're dealing with the entertainment business. They couldn't care less whether they're putting on something that's has basis in reality or doesn't, as long as it's entertaining and it makes money. It's very simple. It's quite simplistic.
It's a shame because this is a serious subject. Now, one question I wanted to ask you is regarding going back to these implants is, have you found any pattern of who is actually putting these implants in people? And playing the devil's advocate, I don't believe this to be true. Is it possible that some of these implants were done by government people or humans?
Well, you can eliminate government because of several factors. One is that I've been, fortunately or unfortunately, in black budget laboratories. And when you find a bunch of scientists that are crowded into a room looking at this stuff under the electron microscope, and the director standing out in the hall with a hand on each hip because these guys are on a government payroll, and he's madder than hell. You know damn well that the black budget people don't have this. Another reason is I've had some dealings with a company recently, a very large one that does black budget work for the government, but it's only about 20%. And 70% of their work is done for commercial development of advanced technology. That's run more like a university. And they told me, don't bring us a project that's 10 years in the future. Don't bring us a project that's 100 years in the future. If you bring us a project that's 1,000 years in the future, we'll take a look at your data. If we like it, we'll sponsor it. And you can stay there and work, and we'll pay you for 6 months. Then they reevaluate your data, and if it still looks good, then you could be there another 6 months, a year, 2 or 3 years, until they develop it into something that's commercially marketable. So we know that this material is not something that's being done by black budget science, which those who deal with black budget science say it could be at least 100 years ahead of academic science. And relative to the objects themselves and where they come from, we have a scientist, very well-respected nuclear physicist, which is on our board, Dr. Robert Kuntz. And he's looked at the isotopic ratios in these objects and determined that and he bases his calculations on the Big Bang. And to get the isotopes that we find in these objects, it's convertible through a constant into a galactic distance. And he said they come from at least 1/3 away across the Milky Way galaxy, and probably from a civilization that's at least 1 million years older than we are.
So do you have any idea are these being implants from abductees who have seen grays?
Well, when abductees talk about seeing grays, and when we look at the Comburgis footage, which I was there while I was being shot in Turkey, and you see grays that are in the front of operating a craft, I mean, you know that grays involved, but who are grays? I mean, we look at people from China, Korea, other, various parts of the Orient, and to us, they all look Oriental. So we can say, want to group all the Orientals into one bag? I don't think so. Maybe there's grays from, different portions of the universe or the multiverse.
Dr. Leir, do you remember in 1974, Sagan sent out a binary code basically describing where we're located in our galaxy, that we're carbon-based and all that, and what our size is, and we occupy the 3rd planet from the sun in our solar system. When we received back a signal, I think it was in 2001, 2004, I'm a little bit unsure.
Crop circle.
Yes, the crop circle stated that they occupy 3 planets in the Zeta Reticular star system. So wouldn't that fit perfectly with the grays looking a little differently, maybe the tall ones, the short ones, the skinny ones, because that's just 3 planets right there, and maybe they evolved a little bit differently, or I don't know if they started on one planet, moved to the other, but that just fits in perfectly with what other people are saying. Everything ties in.
Yeah, it does. And if you look at, it depends on who you believe and who you think is credible and who's non-credible and blah, 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 blah. But people like Dan Burrish, who I had grave doubts as to his authenticity, until I met him, and he invited me to a lecture at Caltech. Well, come to find out, John, as a legal person, you can't walk off the street and lecture at Caltech. And I did some research on what you have to do to lecture at Caltech, and you can't just walk off of the street and walk in there. It's quite a process you got to go through. So I was very impressed with that, and the fact that when he was introduced by an Indian professor of physics, the first thing that was said was, "I'd like to thank the United States Department of Defense and Dr. Dan Burrish for appearing here today." And this was all filmed, and I was impressed. And then he volunteered to actually help me do some research. So I gave him some material, and within a month I got a report back. That was probably the finest piece of scientific investigation that I've had turn out. I would say it was even better than what Los Alamos or New Mexico Tech produced.
When Bob Lazar came out in the late 80s, and he was received with a lot of ridicule, but I believed him, and then they said they couldn't find his record, they couldn't find this. Well, George Knapp uncovered a Los Alamos directory with him in it, which obviously, if you work at Los Alamos, you obviously, as a scientist, not a janitor, you more than presumably have a decent degree from a good place. And this just goes to show how easy it is for them to cover it up. But when Dan Burrish came out, he actually was able to corroborate a lot of Bob Lazar's story. And, of course, expand on it with the work that he did with the J-Rod in S4. And I think that they both corroborated each other, and that's what I think makes Mr. Burrish or Dr. Burrish very credible. I saw several of his interviews, hours combined. He goes into serious detail of everything he works in. I honestly think he's the real McCoy as well.
Oh, I spent some time initially with him because, as I said, I had no faith in his story whatsoever. And I kind of buttonholed him at a conference, and he invited me backstage, and I asked him very specific medical questions. And he was right on. I mean, he was absolutely exacting. There was hems, haws, or buts about the answer. But I want to return this to the subject of the grays. The J-Rods were grays. Bob Lazar talked about grays at Area 51. So are they the same grays? Now Burrish says the grays are us in the distant future. Who knows, for example, whether the civilization that was on Mars before their astronomical calamity occurred were not us in the form of grays.
Yeah, so, you're right. He says that the crash in Roswell was actually the grays where we involved of living underground for 52,000 years, as basically with bigger heads because of our higher intellect, large eyes to see in dark circumstances, and smaller body because the technology we didn't need so much manual labor in the sense. And he said the reason why there was a discrepancy with the Nordics and the Greys is the ones that stayed above ground and kept the human features versus the ones that went below ground and then went to the moon and then to Mars and then to reticuli, I think just kind of fits if we took humans, put them underground 50,000 years later, wouldn't you think that they would look a little bit like that? I think in some ways it kind of makes sense.
Yeah, it does. There's a rationale for that. Plus the fact that how do we know, looking at the vastness of the universe, and if civilizations reside on planets such as ours, how many of them are really surface dwellers and how many of them are subterranean dwellers? Because if you look at the planetary geology, and planets are in a constant state of flux with the mantle moving, and those that have iron cores, that cause changes in the molten plasticity of the tectonic plates. Maybe it's a lot safer to live underground than it is on the surface. So I wouldn't be a bit surprised if there was a lot more subsurface dwellers than there are surface dwellers.
Roger, I'd like to ask you a question. Your books are amazing, Alien Implants and the Alien Scalpel, but I have to tell you, your book, UFO Crash in Brazil, is also really an incredible piece of research. And you're a rare bird. You're and someone with scientific training who does more than armchair research actually goes out into the field and does first-hand interviews and does real research. And I'd love to hear about your research into the UFO crash in Brazil.
Well, that was a case that happened fairly recently in 1996, very much like Roswell, except with the Roswell case, there was more emphasis placed on the crash of a vehicle or vehicles. Incidentally, there's new information on that that's out on the Internet the last 2 days. As far as I know, it was Bruce Maccabee who was able to get a FOIA document from the FBI, of all places, dated 51, that stated there were 3 crashes in Roswell. There was more emphasis placed on the crash of the vehicle or vehicles than in the Roswell case, but in Virginia there was more emphasis placed on the occupants who were seen around town following the crash, and it involved 3 branches of the military. One was the Brazilian Army, the other was the fire department, which in Brazil is a military unit, and the third was the military police, which is a separate unit. But the extent of the research that I did down there when I arrived in Virginia, which is only maybe about 130,000 people. It's a small agricultural town in the state of Minas Gerais, which is mid-northern Brazil. The bottom portion of the southern portion of the state is very lush with agriculture, and the northern portion of the state is where all the jewels, all the precious stones come from. So it's a state with varying terrain, from lush growth to areas which get little or no rainfall. It was almost gray. But the incident occurred in the southern part of the state, as I said, agricultural area. But the plane landed, and I was with a couple of other people who were there to document this and do filming. And we were met coming down the stairs of the plane by a group of people, one of which spoke fluent English and introduced me to the mayor of Brazil, the mayor of Virginia. Wow. and I was absolutely flabbergasted that a mayor of any place would want to come out and meet me. So he did, and they treated me like I was a political potentate from somewhere. Gathered my bags, rushed us in a limo to the hotel, and I had dinner that night. And then the following day, we started our investigation, and some witnesses came forth only because they knew I was a doctor, not because they wanted to give testimony to the case, but because I was a doctor. They hold physicians in higher esteem there, unfortunately, more than they do here today. But
Doc, I got an important question to ask you. You sit on 16 smoking guns, right? And we've known that for 15 years, 17 or 18 now, the media has had every opportunity to come and touch on this subject, yet they haven't. And obviously, because of some censorship, we're worrying about that it's not going to be released in the U.S. Do you think if Brazil discloses that this will force the U.S. to disclose?
Absolutely. The purpose of the meetings that we have at Just Cause with the ET Media Group is to try and get number one, Hollywood to start producing films which are more realistically based on the UFO subject instead of these monster films where everybody gets eaten up and they spend $200 or $300 million and wind up losing $200 million. But Steve Bassett, who heads this up, said that a mistake was recently made by Obama, and he's going to use it. And that was Obama was asked, whether we've had any extraterrestrial contact, and he said absolutely not. That we don't know of any life anywhere else in the universe, extraterrestrial life, and none has ever visited here. So Steve said it's like a big chess game. Now he's going to use that and hit him over the head with it, so to speak.
You know, I hope to God that it wakes people up finally and this disclosure will actually start to happen. And it seems from what you told me that Brazil is far more receptive. The civilians and the people who live there, the citizens, don't have the doubts that the U.S. citizens have. The mayor wanted to meet you because he knows how important of a figure you are. The people in the Virginia, Brazil crash were eager to speak to you. And then, do you think it was the U.S. that covered up their crash? How did that work out?
Well, let me tell you. I'll be out with a new book in a couple of months. And I go, again, back to the Virginia case, and I talked about what's happened within the last year. And there's some very strange things that have happened, which you can only say that it happened by design because of probably external influence over the Brazil populations. But you got to remember that the situation is different in Brazil than it is here. In the first place, Brazil is now energy independent. It doesn't need anything from anywhere or any other country. In fact, it's supplying other countries. Whether it's oil or ethanol or whatever, it's a country which grows, non-GMO crops. The food is absolutely excellent. Their standard of living, although it's a 4-tiered standard of living, is still pretty good for the average person. So they're a bit of a renegade. It's one of the few places in the world where you can pick up a guidebook and they'll tell you where to go see UFOs. If anything UFO-wise happens, it appears in the paper, in the newspapers. It's not like here. So if Brazil was a country that would be disclosed, there would have quite a few ramifications because I have documents that were signed between when Golden was the head of NASA with the Brazilian Space Agency, said that all material, non-terrestrial material coming from Brazil would be turned over to the United States, but that the United States would 50-50 with the commercial development of this with Brazil. Well, what happened was they never did. And I think that one of the indications, one of the Brazilian responses was the calling of A.J. Javard and 4 or 5 other noted UFO researchers to Brasilia, and they had the meeting with the Brazilian Air Force, and they released over 2,000 documents. Now, I have those 2,000 documents, and they are absolutely fantastic drawings and photos of stuff that has been going on in Brazil. But AJ said that's the top of the iceberg. But the Virginia case, as I said, there was some great stuff that of world interest that went on there. That you can still find it on the internet. But I interviewed the 3 girls who were witnesses to one of the ETs. I interviewed their mother, grandmother. I interviewed the wife of the deceased military police officer, a young fellow who was about 25 years of age with the name of Marco Eli Charese. He had saw one of these ETs trying to cross the street, realized that he was injured, went over to him. He gave no resistance. He guided him back to another very small vehicle with one other driver and put him on his lap, no protective gear, no face mask, no gloves, no nothing. He put him on his lap, and they took him to a first aid station. And a first aid station in Brazil is very primitive. They said they're basically not even set up to treat an animal, more or less a human being. They're for very minor things. And from there, they went to a hospital called Hospital Regional, which is in the city of Varginha. And there was a large contingent of military, but they didn't think that was unusual either because there was a base that was nearby, and whenever there was an accident or a medical urgency, they came in large numbers to the hospital. But to make a long story short, this ET was forced to, I should say an orthopedic surgeon on the staff was forced to operate on a fractured leg on this ET. And I interviewed him also, and it's in the book UFO Crash in Brazil. Quite an emotional situation.
Doctor, do you know how many crash and retrievals there have been in Brazil?
I know there's been a few. There may have been more. I don't know how many of them were done by the Brazilian authorities, but I do know that all material from the Varginha case was eventually taken to Sao Paulo and loaded onto a C-5 U.S. Military transport plane and taken back to unknown area in the United States. But as to whether they've done their own crash retrievals, I suspect that they probably have. There's a lot of things about Brazil that are not made public knowledge. There's probably more pyramids in Brazil than there is certainly in Giza, Egypt, or in Central America. And these pyramids, one of them is larger than Cheops, but they're well guarded by the Brazilian government. No one is allowed in there. They're covered with vegetation. They've never been excavated. So there's a long history of ancient artifacts that are in Brazil, as there is in Peru and some of the other South American countries.
In your research into, not only the Brazil crash, but alien implants, did you ever receive any interference from, I'm going to say government or whoever is, actively covering this stuff up and holding the wreckage of the bodies and so on?
The only one I had was locally within the state of California, where I came out with my first book, whatever year that was, and the medical board trumped up a case against me with a patient who had been deceased for 10 years, and he died of some other causes, and I had performed a surgery on him, and he came down with a post-op infection and was responding well, and he got into the hands of another doctor who put him in the hospital, and he wound up, I think, with an amputation. But 10 years went by, and I think he died of a heart attack or something else, and they went back and trumped up a case for me. But when I went to the office and the guy left the room, I kind of rummaged through his desk with a pencil, and guess what was laying on his desk? Was a copy of my book. So.
Oh, really?
Wow.
So I had to do my penance, and the only time they came back to me after that was the use of the word doctor. They didn't like me using doctor because I could be confused with a general physician. So I didn't put the qualifier, but that had nothing to do with me. I've done, a few thousand hours of radio and at least 1,000 hours of television, and they refer to you however they want to refer to you. So it's not under my control at all.
Doc, I have two things I wanted to say. First, have you heard about that case that happened in, I think it was the early 70s in Mexico? Apparently, there was something coming from space, just like with this Brazil crash, where NORAD found this object and assumed it was going to Mexico, possibly Texas, and then they alerted the Mexican authorities. Apparently, it crashed into a civilian plane. The Mexicans said nothing happened. We decided, as the government, the U.S., the government decided to send a force down in there anyway, a crash and retrieval team. When they got there, they found all the alien bodies dead. You recall that case?
Yeah, I think that's, was that the Aztec case?
Chihuahua, if I'm not mistaken.
Chihuahua, yeah.
Yeah. And that fits in a little line out. I drew a little similarity with this Brazil case because the people died with exposure to these beings, right?
Well, there's several stories about that. Some say they were murdered, on the spot.
Well, we do know, according from what A.J. Gavard was able to talk when he talked about these colonel, I don't remember what his last name was, but the colonel that was in charge of Project Saucer when there was this invasion of these over a few month period where these objects kept coming in this little island off Brazil, and they were.
That's the 1957 case on the island of Colares.
Yes, that's the one.
What's called the Chupa Chupa case.
That's the one. And that guy, they said he was found after he, just not too long after he gave the interview to A.J. Gavard, he actually was found dead of suicide, they say. But many of us questioned whether it was suicide or looked.
No, it was definitely suicide.
Oh.
He had become, and it wasn't exactly right after. He had retired from the military, and it was several years later, but he obviously couldn't cope with what happened to him, and evidently not his close friends not believing his story. He became very depressed, and it was definitely a suicide. It's much, a lot of things happen to abductees in which result in suicide, alcoholism, drug, narcotics. They confined to mental institutions because they can't handle it.
Well, that brings up a question: is how do patients react when they find out they actually have these implants in them that are not natural and appear to be, actual? I mean, this is smoking gun proof, particularly for them since they're going through it.
Well, it places them in a very precarious psychological position, and that's why they're psychologically examined before we do any surgery. We want to know whether they're stable, and then we ask them, are you sure you want this out? Because if it is proof, that you were handled by extraterrestrials, you're going to have to live with that. Many of them will oscillate back and forth saying, oh, that's nonsense. I just had bad dreams. Oh, yeah, there's something in there, but I must have gotten it in, when I was a child and didn't remember. And then they get through life. Well, those individuals really shouldn't be operated on, because I always tell them that their life could be worse afterward than it was before. But the ones that we have removed objects from, we've had two of them tell the psychologists almost exactly the same thing, that they had newfound feeling of freedom. And physiologically, we've had most of them feel better with the object gone than when it was there. We had one case of a military intelligence officer that weighed about 200 and some odd pounds when he entered the military, and then they blamed the military for exposing him to some ET technology, wound up with an implanted device, and when he was discharged from the military, he weighed 80 pounds. That was in very poor health. Well, after the object was removed, they started to gain weight and felt better. So, we've never seen anybody worse off following an extraction than they were before.
Dr. Leir, have you had anybody that you've removed an implant come to you and say that they were taken again and another implant has been inserted?
Well, we've had a large percentage of them that are continually abducted, but so far there's been no further sign of reimplantation, which I find very unusual because, I was asked many times, who else in the world is doing what you do? And I can't answer that. I don't know of anybody that's doing. And I did before I ever started doing this, even though I thought it was, a comedic joke. I wanted to see, if anybody else had done anything like this. And I looked through the literature, and there had been people who had taken things out and they turned to powder, disappeared, or whatever. Whitley Strieber, years before I got involved in the field, was operated on by Dr. Leir in Texas because he had an implant in his ear. And he opened it up and grabbed the whole little piece of it and was able to get it. But the rest of it moved out of the way, and he got so scared that he just took suture and closed it up. So that's it, buddy. I don't want anything more to do with this. So
I've had a lot of abductees tell me that they've gone to doctors, and the doctors have become very upset when the abductees tell them, well, no, I haven't had surgery, because the doctor is pointing to, various scars or, even objects in their body and cannot explain them. So this is a challenge, I think, not only for the abductees, but for, people like you.
Yeah, well, that's, I guess I get them because, they come to me. Now, we get thousands of contacts, but it's only about 10% that are possible candidates for surgery, and then when you narrow that down, it's only about 1% of the 10% that are individuals that you want to perform a surgery on. We set up a really strict set of criteria and protocols for doing these cases, and we have to do that because we want this pure science. That's the same way we treat the specimens. We treat it as if it was, a murder case or, physical evidence of a crime scene. Once they're confined in the container, they're sealed and signed. And it's never opened again unless there's witnesses or it's photographed or videoed. So we try and protect even when they go to a laboratory. The laboratory technician has to sign a document stating that he's receiving the specimen in a container that's sealed with such and such a signature, and they're opening the container on such and such a date at such and such a time for a specific purpose, EDX testing or SEMs or whatever.
And that's the absolute best way to do it because you're actually covering your bases. The show's going to end in about 8 minutes. I wanted to use this time real quick, Dr. Leir, to let everybody know that you can find all his amazing books, especially that one that's coming soon will be on his website. It's alienscalpel.com. Again, alienscalpel.com. Find Dr. Leir's website. You'll find a whole bunch of information. And while we're on the topic of websites, I also want to mention Preston's. PrestonDennett.com, DENNETT. There you'll see his library of books too. So all you listeners out there, be sure and check out both websites. Find amazing books on them both. As we're coming down to the last few minutes of this time, I think if we had to summarize everything into, we've had a great almost 2-hour talk of talking about these otherworldly specimens that have come from 16 different surgeries, which have been to the top of the cream of the laboratories have tested these things. What else do you think it's going to take to wake the people up, Doctor?
Well, I think that if everybody participated in some activity towards that goal, people would be waking up faster than they are. For example, you just mentioned Preston's website and Preston's books. I mean, he's got a lot of books out there, folks. Buy one of his books and just buy one and give it away to somebody else for a birthday or an anniversary or Christmas or whatever. Take any of the reputable researchers. Get some DVD or video or a book or whatever. Purchase it and give it to just one other person. And that person will do the same, and it'll help, get the word out. Plus the fact that folks like John, you're helping to wake the world up, wake people up to the actual ET reality because of the radio show. So I noticed as of late there are numerous, new radio shows, more people talking about it. And the more people talk about it, you don't have to ask a younger person, do you think there's other life in the universe? Because you know their answer. They're going to say, well, yes, of course.
It seems here we have another caller coming in. I believe this is the Ivy West. Welcome to Revolution Radio.
Hello. I have been
Well, hello there, Ivy.
Hi, Dr. Leir. What a great show. I even learned a few things that I hadn't heard you talk about before. And you're one of the world's foremost alien implant removal surgeons, and I think it's by default you're a podiatrist. And, it just happened that you had people come along that had, accidentally found these things in them and removed them to find out what they were. And, you're doing a wonderful service. And if anybody can help Dr. Leir, please donate to him. You can go to his website, alienscalpel.com. He's got a huge research team, and your donations would really help further this research along. And that's one of the things that you can do for Dr. Leir. And I'm sorry, but I really wanted to come in and let people know that there is ways they can help. If they can't help in some other ways, they can help the research go on, because I know you have some more projects, and the last removal that you did, you found out on there that signal was the only signal that was put into the astronauts in NASA is pretty significant, don't you think?
Oh, I think so, and I thank you for a recommendation for research donations, and I just want to bring up the point that A&S Research, who was responsible for the extractions and all the research on both the biological and metallurgical materials, we don't charge a penny to anybody to have anything done. So, we can't many times afford, if you're in Hong Kong, to bring it to the United States, but if you can get here, as I said, there are no charges made for any of our services.
Let me add into what Ivy and Dr. Leir just said. The research, folks, is very expensive. If you notice, these Dr. Leir, his team, they do this pro bono, but still there are costs that we can't avoid, and it's very, very expensive. So any donations that can be made to further this research, to further another implant removal, would be great.
Also, anything that they purchase from the website store is not really a purchase. It's a donation to A&S Research, and they're just being rewarded with the item that they select. So it's totally tax deductible because it's a 501c3. So you're not really purchasing anything from A&S. It's just you're making a donation and you're choosing the product that you would like to receive.
Wow, that's really nice that you allow that. So you actually get something for your donation, a memento, something to show that you're contributing, and just to keep the research going and all. And John, you're doing a fantastic job too there. I know you folks had some problems earlier, but you guys hung in there and got it straightened out. So it was very, very quick.
We know what that's like, don't we, Ivy?
Oh boy, that's for sure. We had the same problem with Professor Searle back twice now, a couple weeks back. But we're going to get things straightened out here. And folks, you're listening to one of the radio stations, one of the newest and upcoming radio talk show hosts. And, of course, Dr. Leir has been with us for many years doing this research. And, we really, really do need to support the station. We need to support the researchers out there, because the government is cracking down more and more and not allowing this research to get out. And or they'll just debunk it. They have so many people coming along to try and debunk this, and it's real.
I completely agree. Ivy, thank you for the kind words. Sadly, this show is coming to near a close. Before